everybody, it's Kendra here, welcome back. I'm really excited to share with you this sewing tutorial of how to make a sweatshirt robe or housecoat. Now, I wouldn't really consider myself a robe kind of person, and I've had them in the past and they have times that they are helpful. However, I always choose sweatshirt over anything else around the house for being comfortable, for going out, for keeping warm, all that sort of thing. I got thinking about it and I thought it would be nice to have a robe type thing, mainly if you are new here. I have a baby coming and I like to wear just like nursing tank tops and having something to slip on over top. So anyways, I got thinking about it and I decided to make a robe out of sweatshirt fleece. Now, I felt like this was kind of a cross, the best of both worlds, in that I get this super cozy, warm sweatshirt feel, but it's loose, it's open, it's long, and I can just tie it on or throw it on, and we're ready to go. So this is what I ended up with, and I'm going to take you along with me as I sew it together. So I picked up my fabric at Fabricland. It's just a sweatshirt fleece. It was 50% off. Again, Fabricland, you just have to watch the sales, or else you can always purchase online. And kind of like all sweatshirts is the smooth outside with the fuzzy warm inside. Now during the tutorial I show you a few different ideas of things you can use for your cuffs, and I modified this a little bit from what I originally planned, just because my sweatshirt fleece is fairly thick and I wanted to do what I could to reduce bulk in as many areas as I could. I also wanted a fitted cuff so that I can pull up my sleeves to do dishes and it's not sliding down and it's not getting all over the place. So just to take you through my robe here, it has fitted cuffs and a fairly fitted sleeves, more so than what you might consider like most kimono robes would be. I went ahead and put in the tie and I sewed it right on the back, and I'll show you how I do that, just because I've had robes where they were not attached and I feel like I was always searching for it or feeding it through the loops, or it was never where it needed to be. So I just went ahead and sewed it on, but it could also just be hanging in the back and that won't bother me too much. It's nice and wide so it can cozy up and give that extra warmth to tie it, but it can also just hang down. There are pockets, one on each side, and honestly, I made them phone size. Now, as you can see, I am pregnant and you can tell it fits over my belly. However, I do think it will fit just fine throughout the postpartum period and when I'm not pregnant as well. That's kind of the great thing about this. I didn't do any modifications to make it specifically maternity, so I think this would be helpful to most of you. It just is one of those pieces that will take me through a number of different phases in my life. Now, I did review a few different online blog tutorials before I put this together for you, so I will link those down below if you're more if you want to follow along their pictures, the way they did them. I didn't see any that were sweatshirt fleece with the cuffs, things like that, so I made some modifications. However, it will give you an idea and kind of where I was starting from as well. All right, so let's get to it.
So we're going to begin by taking a item that fits you, and I'm going with about a knee length dress, laying it on the fold of my fabric and cutting around with a lot of extra ease. Now that I have this huge rectangle, I am going to cut two of the same. So basically cut but not on the fold. Here you can see I line it up on the fold just to make sure that it fit in this piece. However, I'm going to cut around and then split it. So I have one large back piece and two halves for the front pieces. I'm then going to cut for my ties, and you can measure around your waist with enough room to tie to see how long to make these, and I decided to cut two, each around 4 inches wide, that I will sew together to make the tie on my robe. I'm going to use a shirt with long sleeves to measure my sleeve length by laying it on my back piece, so you can see from the middle of the back to the arm length how long it will be. This has a drop shoulder, so your sleeves are going to look short, but that's just because they sit lower. And I use that as a guide to cut two pieces that I'll use as my sleeves. You can see I went with a wide rectangle, and that's just because a lot of robes do have those really wide kimono style sleeves. However, later on you'll see I take it in a little bit. So here are all my pattern pieces laid out: the wide back, the two front panels, two large rectangle sleeves, and the ties, the long skinny pieces. I'm taking my two front panel pieces, placing them right sides together, and I'm going to use a long ruler to make an angled cut, and this is just to make a V-neck type shape. It's not a super sharp V-neck, but it is just to bring it in so that it's a little more open around your neck. Here I've laid out my front pieces and then put the back piece on right side down, and I'm just lining up the corners here because these will be the first seams that I sew, those shoulder seams on both sides. I'm ready to get sewing. I went ahead and put a few pins in on each side, and I'm just going to do a seam on each shoulder piece, attaching the front to the back. Now that the shoulder seams are complete, I'm going to take my sleeve pieces, fold them lengthwise, and find the middle. I'm going to use a pin to mark that middle point and match it up with the shoulder seam. I'm going to place them right sides together and put pins along the length, and then you will sew along to attach the sleeve pieces onto the main body. I went ahead to try it on just so you can see how that shoulder seam is looking. The next seam will be going down the length of the arm, matching up the seam where I'm holding it right now, and then sewing together the sides all the way from the armpit down to the hem. I've switched it around so it is now right sides together. I'm going to insert a few pins to keep things lined up and sew that seam on both sides of my housecoat. Once that's completed, try it on again and see what you think of it. Now, you can see my sleeves are fairly baggy, and I just decided that since I want to be able to use it for housework, things like that, I don't want my sleeves drooping and everything, so I just pinned it where I wanted it. I don't want it super tight and fitted, but I do want to take it in a little bit. So I'm just kind of marking how I want it at the wrist and where I want that ankle to start, and then I'm going to sew it, cut it, and match it on the second sleeve. Trying it on, I see I am much happier with the sleeves, and it's time to decide what to do with the cuff. You can always turn under the edge and hem it, or else you can use a separate jersey type fabric, fold it over to make a band and create a cuff out of that sort of material. I have this old pair of leggings with a waistband that I think will make a perfect cuff. It's not the same kind of ribbing as a typical sweatshirt, and you can tell it has elastic inside. However, it's what I have on hand, and I think it's going to work really well. I measured a length around my wrist and made sure that I was able to stretch it to match my cuff, and then cut two the same, one for each sleeve. I'm now going to make a loop, and you can see with this elastic, I'm going to first sew the elastic and then I'm going to top stitch the outer fabric. Again, depending on what kind of material you're using, you want to make a cuff and make sure it's enclosed and finished. I'm going to take my cuff and insert it inside my sleeve, keeping right sides together and matching up the seams on the cuff as well as on the sleeve. I'm going to put a pin in as well as a pin directly opposite so that as I sew, I can pull it a little bit, and it will give me a nice pulled cuff. Make sure to use a zigzag stitch so that it has some stretch going over your hand. You can see it sticks up a little bit, so I'm going to lay it flat and do a quick top stitch all the way around my cuff. Now it's time to decide how we want to do our binding around the neck. You can use a separate piece and do an attached binding, and I'm showing you here by folding in a strip of fabric in half. You can sew it to attach and then top stitch it flat. However, because this fabric is so thick, I thought it would create too much bulk. Another option is to use that same sort of jersey fabric and do a contrasting binding attached all the way around. However, I'm going to go pretty simple here and just hem it. I'm doing this by turning it under twice so that my edge is enclosed, and I'm doing a fairly wide hem all the way around just so that I will be able to do 2 rows of stitching to keep it hopefully nice and flat, and again trying to reduce the amount of bulk that is in that whole seam all the way around. Here it is when it is pinned. I wanted to make sure, especially when it comes to where the V turns down, that it's pinned properly, as well as going around the neck. And you want to make sure, again, with the thick fabric like this, that you're not getting bunching. I started off with the seam that is turned under and I went all the way around with that, and then did a second seam just 1/4 of an inch from the edging. Again, just trying to keep it flat and neat. I now have 2 rows of stitching, and I'm going to focus on the hem at the bottom, and this is going to be completed the same way, where I folded under twice, doing a nice wide bottom on it, and I'm going to do the 2 rows of stitching again. In the corner, I'm going to fold it into a triangle shape and trim off the extra bulk there again, just trying to make it nice and neat and keep everything laying flat. Try it on, just make sure you're happy with the fit and everything, and at this point I decided to add on some pockets. So I'm just using a little scrap of fabric, I'm laying it on to see about how big and where I want placement to be, and I'm going to do this really simply. I'm going to start by folding over the edge and sewing it flat. This creates a nice tidy seam at the top. And then I'm going to stitch it onto the side of my housecoat by turning under the edges and sewing around the sides and the bottom. The pockets are complete. I'm going to focus on sewing the tie for my robe, and because I cut 2 pieces, I'm going to put them right sides together and just sew along the long side of the tie, one to the other, making sure to keep both ends open so that we can turn it right way and top stitch at the end. I added a top stitch to both sides of my tie and also did the same, folded in the ends and top stitch there as well. You can see with the bulk I added in a couple extra lines of stitching just to keep it flat again. Then I folded it in half and stuck in a pin at the halfway point because I decided to sew my tie directly on the robe, and I found the center back by lining up my side seams together, holding it back and putting a pin in the center back of my robe. I match up those 2 pinned points, add the pin together so it's stuck on there, and I'm just doing a straight line of stitching up and down. This will attach my tie onto the robe in the back so I don't have to worry about adding any extra loops or losing my tie. Next up, take a look, see if there's any other adjustments to make, but it's time to trim all of your ends, all your strings, and enjoy your nice comfy sweatshirt robe.
Alright, thank you so much for watching this tutorial. If you have any questions, please leave them down below and I will do my best to answer them. Until next time, bye!